You can believe God loves you and still not trust him to take care of you. I want you to pay attention to what happens when something you need starts to run low. What happens when your bank account is on E? What happens when you lose that client or 2 or 3 clients back to back? What happens when your views all of a sudden tank or you lose that opportunity? Do you resort back to hustling and grinding? Do you resort back to trying to force an outcome and control the situation? Do you resort to trying to take things back into your own hands? Because one thing I've learned through my life is that pressure is an amazing test for exposing what you actually believe about God. You can sincerely love God and still have areas in your life where you live like you don't have a father. I've been breaking down Matthew 6 over the last week, and before Jesus tells the disciples, do not worry, he spends almost an entire chapter talking about your father. When you give, your father sees you. When you pray, your father already knows your needs before you ask. When you fast, your father sees what is done in secret. Then he gets to do not worry. Then he tells them, look at the birds, look at the lilies. Doesn't your father take care of them? Are you not of more value than they? So Jesus is trying to teach the disciples how to interpret their needs through the character of their father. Abraham is actually a perfect example of what your trust looks like when it is fully mature. So in Genesis chapter 12, there's a famine that hits the land. So Abraham heads down to Egypt. Abraham is deathly afraid of the Egyptians because contrary to popular belief, his wife Sarah was a baddie. Abraham was like, yo, y'all not finna backdoor me and get my wife. So what does he do? He starts trying to control the situation and to manipulate the outcome to preserve himself. Now, God had already given Abraham a promise, but when the pressure came, Abraham felt responsible for still preserving himself. Fast forward to Genesis chapter 22, there's a whole different Abraham that shows up. God said, take your son Isaac, the one you waited over 20 years for. Yeah, go offer him up. Abraham gets up and goes. He's not trying to manipulate the situation. He's not trying to control the outcome to protect himself. Hebrews 11 says Abraham was so convinced that God would keep his word that even if his son Isaac died, he believed that God could raise him from the dead. That is a major transformation. Genesis 12, Abraham believed God, but when the pressure showed up, it still exposed where fear was governing him. By Genesis chapter 22, God had already spent years developing and maturing his trust. So the man who once manipulated circumstances to protect himself became willing to put the promise itself on the altar because he finally understood that if God gave it to me, I don't have to become God to keep it alive. Some of you are beating yourself up right now because you still have Genesis 12 reactions. You love God, but when the pressure comes, fear is still governing you. And it's causing you to go back to grasping and forcing and trying to preserve everything. But notice God didn't strike Abraham down in Genesis chapter 12. He formed him. And maybe that's what this season is doing for you. Because eventually your sonship has to go from just calling God Father to actually trusting him like one. And sometimes the best and greatest evidence that your trust is maturing is when you can finally put something God gave you back on the altar.